Hey guys, this is Sharat with ReSimpli, host of the ReSimpli podcast, bringing you a very special guest on this podcast, Jeffrey Holst. Jeffrey, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely, Jeffrey. Thank you so much for being a guest on the podcast. Tell us a little bit about yourself. Where do you live and what kind of real estate investing or other cool things you do related to real estate?
Sure. Yeah, that's a broad question because even the where do you live question is hard for me because I travel a lot. Sometimes I don't even remember where I live. But I have an apartment in Chattanooga, Tennessee, and I have another one in San Juan, Puerto Rico. And I split my time mostly between those two, about 40% in Puerto Rico, maybe 50% in Chattanooga, and the rest just traveling wherever. And I fund that with real estate investing. So I mean, I go to Puerto Rico because I love it. So it's like my vacation home slash hang out and do cool things place. I do mainly mid-size multifamily, so like 10 to 50 unit buildings. That's where I like to hang out. But I have 100,000 square foot of industrial, 50,000 of office, 30,000 of retail, and then about 350 apartment units.
Perfect, perfect. That's awesome. Like it seems like you're doing lots of really cool things. How did you get started?
Same way everyone does. I bought my first deal. But I actually, I'll take you back a little bit before that. So I'm a lawyer by trade. I grew up in Michigan. I became a bankruptcy attorney in 2007. So that was like really good timing. The economy started to crash in 2008, and we were filing a lot of bankruptcies. Unfortunately, it was like August or September of 2008. I ended up feeling a little sick and I went to the hospital and ended up finding out I had leukemia.
Oh,
And
no, sorry to hear
But
that.
ultimately caused me not to be able to work for a long period of time. I built up a ton of debt and ended up filing personal bankruptcy myself. It was just too early in my career to have that income drop off. At that point, I said, well, I need to do something different. So I took a corporate job in Tennessee. That's how I ended up down here. I started saving up my bonuses and I bought my first deal. It was a $30,000 condo in the middle of the Great Recession. It had been 100,000 bank owned foreclosure, but we bought it from the bank for 30,000. And I did that with a partner 50-50, and we paid cash, 15,000 each to buy it.
Okay. So you did that, you bought a condo, and then what happened after that? You're like, oh, this is good. I mean, I'm assuming you bought it with the intention of renting it out
Yeah,
at
yeah.
that
So
price point.
we bought it for 30,000. We put about 5,000 into renovating it. Rented it out back then for $600 a month or something. So it was a good return. I mean, it was like a 2% rule. But we still own it today, and I think rents are about 1,200 a month now. And so it's been pretty good. It's probably worth 150,000, something like that
Wow,
now. And
5x.
yeah, so we bought that with cash, and then maybe 2 or 3 months later, another unit in the same building came up for sale, a similar price point. We knew it worked, so we figured out how to buy that one. Ended up borrowing a little bit of money, but I didn't have any credit. This is 2011, and I'd filed bankruptcy in 2010, but I was able to borrow it from a friend to pay for my half of that one. And So we just started out with that kind of, sort of friends and family lending kind of deal. But we still own both of those, and they both do really well. And from there, we just kept finding deals and doing a lot of hard money stuff and a lot of private money stuff back in 2012, 2013, stuff like that.
So you're noticing you're buying these super inexpensive properties. I started around the same time period, like 2000, August 2010 is when I bought my first property. It was like ridiculous numbers back then.
Yeah.
So you bought these properties, they're cash flowing good, and then you're like, wow, this is a really good opportunity. I should look more into it and invest into other properties. Like, how did you kind of transition from that?
Yeah, so I mean, once we bought those first two condos, I was completely out of money. But we found this duplex, and this is, by the way, this is all in Metro Detroit. So I was living in Tennessee, but I was investing in Detroit.
Oh, so
And
these are in Detroit. Okay,
Yeah, and
interesting.
so we were
Yeah.
able to buy houses in 2012, 2013 for like $5,000 for a house. I mean, it was crazy, right? And they'd rent out for $600-700 a month. So we bought a lot of houses in Detroit, and what we would do is we'd fix them up and rent them out, typically to a Section 8 tenant, and then sell them off to like turnkey style to another
Right.
investor from out of the state or out of the country. And we would flip two or three, and we would use the money we made from those to buy one for ourselves in a slightly better neighborhood that we would keep in cash. So we just kept doing that. And between 2012 and 2016, when I quit my corporate job, we ended up purchasing about 56 units, all free and clear, just myself and one other partner.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah, and we never
Congratulations
put any
on,
more
yeah.
money in after that first like $30,000 or whatever. So, but it was, doing a lot of work, flipping a lot of
Right.
properties, and then reinvesting all the rents. Both of us had reasonable other incomes at that point, so we didn't pull anything out of the business for 7 years.
You just kept putting all the savings back into the
Yeah.
business, kept buying more property. So you left your job in 2016,
Yeah. So I
right?
went from bankrupt in 2010 to like retired, I guess, in 2016.
Wow.
That lasted
Amazing
like,
story.
yeah, it only lasted like 2 weeks and I got bored and started doing more
Yeah.
real estate stuff.
Right.
But yeah, I haven't ever had a corporate job since then. And I've never had any kind of job since then. I've just done the real estate investing
That's
full time.
amazing. That's amazing. Such an inspiring story. I mean, like to go bankrupt in 2010 and then retire financially free in
Yeah, well, I mean, I
2016.
was
That's
literally on my deathbed in 2008,
mm,
and then 7.5 years later, I was thriving, right? So, I mean, I
mm,
went from a bankrupt bankruptcy attorney who was dying of leukemia to, independent wealth and being able to like hang out on the beach for the rest of my life if I wanted.
yeah. It's such an
Turns out that's
inspiring
really
story.
boring, so you can only do that so long.
Yeah. So you did it for 2 weeks and then you're like, okay, I can't
Yeah,
just,
I
not do
actually
anything.
Yeah, after 2 weeks, I thought I got to find something to do. So I ended up doing this Burr deal, and I bought a duplex in Chattanooga. It was the first property I ever bought in Chattanooga. Everything else was in Michigan up till that point. I bought a duplex, fixed it up, renovated it, pulled the money back out, and then I thought this is too slow. I should buy apartment buildings. I'd been listening to a lot of podcasts and stuff like that as I was getting ready to quit my job, and I had heard all about how the different way they value commercial property versus traditional residential, so that 5 unit and up stuff. So I started looking at B and C class 10 to 15 unit buildings, and I found a 12 unit building. I didn't have quite enough cash to buy it myself, so I split it with my dad. We paid 635 for this 12 unit. Ended up selling it 2.5 years later for 1,200,000 because of the
Wow.
value add strategy that we implemented there. And once I saw that happen, it was like I'm buying these all the time. So we bought a
And
lot
then,
of.
and you're just buying them straight from MLS. I mean, not, yeah, I mean, I guess
Yeah,
MLS
like
or like LoopNet.
LoopNet or commercial MLS, or sometimes brokers just call us now. And I mean, we've done this
Right.
in Michigan and Chattanooga, and I've done some small syndications too. So we bought a 56 unit building, I don't know, 2 years ago now. The last 2 years, it's been a little bit harder to find deals that pencil out
Mm,
for that, but
right. Yeah. How was the transition from going from condo, single family to unit to buying this? Was that the 12 unit building that you
12
bought?
unit, yeah.
Yeah, 12 unit. Well, how was the transition like? Like, is that like, did you need a mindset shift? Did you need to have, more experience working with someone?
The
Just,
I
yeah.
think the biggest thing for me was just wrapping my head around the debt, because we had 56 units, they were free and clear except for a little bit of private money debt. None of it was personally guaranteed, and to go buy that $635,000 deal, putting $150,000 down, we had nearly a $500,000 in debt that I had to sign a personal guarantee for. So I had to say, am I okay with this? Like, do I believe in it enough to sign on the dotted line? And once I wrap my head around that, man, I've gone full circle on that. I don't have hardly anything free and clear anymore. I have conservative debt positions, 60% loan to value, 50% loan to value, but I really like the acceleration of wealth that comes from those amortization gains.
Right. And then how much, I'm curious, so you bought for 635, how much money did you put into it to sell for 1.2, 2.5 years later?
Oh, hardly anything. What we did
Wow.
is we implemented strategic rent increases, and we
Okay.
used the money. that we were getting from the extra cash flow to renovate units. I mean, it was only 12 units. So like we were putting maybe 8 or 10,000 a unit in when we would turn them over. And they all turned over in a 2.5 year period. And then
Yeah.
we did a little extra, I put granite in and hard surface floors, took out the nasty carpet, and I moved the rents
Right.
from 600 to 1,200, and that's
Wow.
why the value doubled, because the rents went up
Wow.
so much. And
That's
part of that
great.
was the market, right? This is 2016. Rents went up a lot between 2016 and 2019. So we were benefiting from the market and also from the value
Hmm.
add strategy.
So once you did that, that was a 12 unit. And right now you said you're investing your sweet spot 10 to 50 units, 50?
Yeah, the biggest is 56 units that I have right.
Okay. Got it. Got it. I'm curious, like, why not, look at 100, 200 unit apartment
Yeah.
complexes?
I do look at them. They're a bit more expensive. There's more competition in that market. A lot of the big syndicators, they just don't want to compete for a 20 unit building. So that's
Okay.
it's a little bit easier to get deals that make sense. And there's a lot more mom and pop operators, and that's really what I buy from. I buy from someone who's owned it for a long time. They maybe haven't kept up with the building, so it's a little tired, but it's in a decent area. That's the strategy I take. I think in the next market cycle, whenever that occurs, we'll move to buying bigger deals. But the ones that we've looked at in the last few years, just they haven't penciled out for what our model looks
Hmm.
like.
And then the ones that you're buying, are you buying them for long-term passive income, or is the goal is to buy them,
Yeah.
add value and then maybe flip them to another
Yeah, it's a
investor?
combination. I mean, we've sold, I think, 5 apartment buildings, mostly in that 15 to 20 range, per unit, or 15 to 20 unit range, in the last 5 years. So it's not like, but we bought 2 or 3 every year. So we've been accumulating more than we've been selling. And a lot of times what we'll do, like when I sold that 12 unit, I ended up 1031ing that into buying a 30,000 square foot shopping center. And it was a diversification play at that point, because I had bought a couple hundred units of apartments between when I bought that and when we went and sold it. And I thought, well, I'll try to do something different. And I like to do that with when it's just my dad and I, or it's just me, or just me and one partner. I like to play with some different markets to see what works for the syndication thing. Because if I'm going to raise money, I want to make sure I understand that market. So like retail, I don't think I'll be syndicating retail anytime soon.
Okay.
There's advantages to it, but it's a bit more challenging in some
Right.
ways.
It's especially, do you feel like the current, market cycle that we're in, the retail, the commercial sector, it's something that you would stay away from? You would,
Yeah, I would be
tell.
careful with it. It depends, right? So you have a couple of macro trends that you have to think about. Like one, people are buying stuff online more than they used to. Like you wouldn't want bookstores, right? But if you have Family Dollar, or if you have a karate studio, I pick those as examples because that's what I have in my building, right? I have a local grocery store, and I have a karate studio, and those places aren't going anywhere. Like people aren't gonna
Right.
go get their karate
Do that
lessons on
online.
Amazon. They need to go see that dojo. Yeah, so it depends on the mix of tenants that you have in there. So like kind of that neighborhood community center, those aren't going away anytime soon.
Right.
But if you're big box stores, I'd be real careful. I'm not buying shopping malls.
Got it. And are you buying them all in the Tennessee market, or if you like
Yeah,
expanded
so
to?
most of what I have is either in Michigan, because I have a partner up there that has a property management company, or it's Chattanooga and 50 miles from Chattanooga. So that could be North Georgia, it could be Alabama, but
Okay.
it's just the general area around Chattanooga. Lately I've started analyzing deals in Puerto Rico also. And this is, by the way, it's not all that strategic. It's like I look at deals wherever I'm familiar with, because I think that a big part of real estate investing is having hyper local knowledge of the market. Because
Mm.
you can have even in Chattanooga, there's one street where if you bought a duplex there, you could do really well, but 2 blocks over, if you bought a duplex, it's like a war zone, and you don't want to buy there, right?
Right.
And it's true everywhere. So I feel like you really need to understand the area that you're buying in before you start buying. And so I buy in Chattanooga and around here because I know this area. I've lived here
Mm.
since 2010, and I feel the same way about Michigan. Like, I mean, I lived in Michigan until I was 30, so I grew up there. I have a pretty good idea of that market. And now the last 3 years, I've spent about half my time in Puerto Rico, so I'm starting to get comfortable with the idea of buying there. I'm starting
Got
to
it.
understand what areas I like and what ones I don't and stuff like that.
Got it. Got it. So you have a lot of experience in, different verticals within real estate, like commercial, retail and small multifamily. Given where the interest rate is right now, I'm very curious, like, where do you see the market going from here? If there was someone, I just bought my first 11 unit property like 3, 4 months ago. So we're in the process of rehabbing it, finishing it, getting it rent out, and then start the refi
Yeah.
process. But where do you see the market going from here?
Well, I mean, it's going to depend a lot on what interest rates do because, the return, the cap rate is really a function of two things, right? So the cap rates are the risk-free rate of return plus a risk premium. That's just general
Right.
economic theory, right? So the risk in the market is going to vary from market to market, from time to time, but the risk-free rate of return is pretty similar everywhere in the US at least. It's based on the, overnight borrowing rates. So the risk-free rate of return might be based on the 10-year treasury or something, or the 3-month treasury. I don't really know exactly, but it's based on a static metric. So if those rates go down, cap rates should go down, which means value should go up, right? Because the risk doesn't change substantially
Right.
based on interest rates. So if interest rates go down, which they are trending down, like we just got quoted almost a full point less than what it was 3 months ago on commercial debt. So,
Wow.
you see the 10-year treasuries dropped pretty precipitously, like almost a point as well during the last 60 days. So, I mean, based on that, especially with the Fed, finally saying they're probably going to lower rates in September, yeah, I mean, I think if those things happen, then the market will stay pretty stable. Now, one thing to keep in mind is a lot of the value on the larger commercial properties it's already eroded. 100, 200, 300 unit buildings are down 20%, maybe 30% in some markets over the last 2 years. The smaller deals, like your 11 unit, it's so dependent on net operating income, and you have so much flexibility in that when you're renovating and doing a value add, it might not matter. You can make
Right.
money on that in a down market. You can make
Right.
money on that in almost any market, which is why I love that size. If
Yeah.
you buy it right and you have a good strategy, you're going to be fine.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
it'll
No,
it'll
absolutely.
cash flow and you just wait it out. The market will get stronger at some points, it'll get weaker at other points.
Yeah. What sort of interest rate are you getting right now? I'm just curious, just
Well, so the Fannie and Freddie rates are below 6 now. They're like mid fives, which is way better than they were a year
right.
ago.
And you're
Um,
getting
yeah, so I
five
saw
year.
they quoted us 561 on a 30-year Freddie product the other day. But
Okay.
that's a non-recourse, it has to be north of $1 million, probably even a little bit more than that for the loan value before they'll even talk to you. And there's a lot of cost associated with that and prepayment penalties, yield maintenance, all that kind of stuff. But I mean, the local banks are likewise come down a lot, where they were quoting us stuff in the low sevens. Now they're in the low sixes.
Interesting. And then the investors that are investing with you, are you paying them monthly, paying them quarterly? How do you pay your
Yeah,
investors out?
most of it's set up as quarterly, but it depends on the deal, right? So, we had some deals where we did like a apartment conversion where we bought an apartment building and converted it to condos. Those just got paid as they sold off, right? So every time
Okay.
we would sell a unit, people got paid, and it might not be paid every unit. Maybe we sold two in the same month, we pay them one time, but I mean, it was like sort of periodic payments
Right.
like that. Well, not periodic, that's the wrong word, but like, they were just
Yeah,
random
as there was,
payments
yeah.
whenever we sold something, as opposed to like quarterly or monthly payments. Now we have one industrial building that's a triple net deal. And it's very predictable. And so those are monthly payments. There's really nothing else to do. We just
Mm.
collect the money and pay the money out, right? But other ones are mainly quarterly. But again,
Yeah.
some of our deals they might, when it's a value add deal. Like if you bought we bought this 20 unit building in Chattanooga a couple years ago now, but it was a heavy lift. Rents were like $400, and now we're at $1,200 in rents, right? So a
Wow.
huge difference. But we had to do a
Wow.
lot of work. It was in a good area, but it was a very, very poorly maintained property. That thing, because of all of the inflation that happened, we were way over budget on renovation. It just never cash flowed until very, very recently. So 2.5, 3 years of no cash flow. But we explained the process. We told them at the beginning it would probably be at least a year before there's any cash flow. It took longer than we thought, but flip side, bought it for 1 million too, and it's worth, close to 3 million now. So it's fine,
Wow.
right?
Right.
It's a different strategy than
Yeah.
buying just a pure cash flow
And I
play.
think it also comes down to like playing the long game, right? If you're just so focused on investing, if you're like, hey, if I don't make this cash flow next quarter or in 6 months, then I'm going to be out of the business, then you probably shouldn't look at
Yeah.
that deal,
And
Um,
and I've been super comfortable with that. Like I told you, with our first deals for 7 years, we didn't take any cash flow, right? But that
right,
wasn't raising investor money. That was just me and one other partner. But we had just decided that our goal was to grow wealth, not to worry about cash flow. We would live off of our jobs, and
right,
we would increase our wealth by doing that. And because I'm comfortable with that, as long as I explain that to my investors, somebody who needs cash flow right now, this is not a good deal for you. You should invest in this one instead. And that's what we do. We let them make their decision on what are their
right.
goals.
Have you still kept all the initial condos, duplexes that you bought, or have you sold them off and put the money
Well,
into bigger?
yeah, I sold some. We do 1031, some into apartment buildings. But those first two condos, I still own both of those. Yeah.
Right.
So
Yeah. And I'm curious, like, what's been your best source of finding deals? Has everything come from either brokers or listed on the market? Are you doing any of your direct to seller marketing also?
yeah, I've never really done a lot of direct to seller stuff, but I have, I go to a lot of real estate meetups and I hear about a lot of deals, and people know me as a guy who buys a certain, size deal. And a lot of times people will find those deals, like these wholesalers will have like they're looking for single families to send out to their wholesale list. And then they'll call me and be like, hey, I just got this 10 unit. I don't know what to do with it. And, so sometimes I get that kind of deal. It's off market,
Right.
but it wasn't through my own efforts. It was through the relationship I had.
Got it. For someone who's starting out, a newer real estate investor, maybe they haven't done a deal or they've done some deals and they really want to get into that, the 10 to 20, 30 unit apartments, not maybe initially to buy it for themselves if they don't have the cash, but to work with someone like you. What's the best way for them to do that? Like, how would you,
Yeah, I
recommend
mean,
someone gets,
yeah, so I mean the starting point is like, even if even if they had the deal and they had the money for the down payment, they may not be able to get the loan, right? Because you don't have the experience, and the
right,
bank's going to underwrite you and the deal and your capital, right? So they want to see that it's going to work. So the starting point would be to partner with someone who's already doing it. And if you find a deal and you have someone who does those kinds of deals and they look at it and say, yeah, that's a good deal, probably you can cut a deal with them to take a piece of it, even if it's like 10% or 15% of the deal, because you found it. That's a really great way to get started and get that experience. And once you have a couple of those deals under your belt, it becomes a lot easier to do them on your own.
right. So 10 to 15%, like if I came to you and say, hey, Jeffrey, I have this deal. I don't have any money, but I have it under contract. Like you would put all the money in and I just get like 10%,
Yeah,
15%,
I
like as
mean,
I find this.
obviously,
Yeah, that's a great
yeah, I
way to
mean,
get
obviously, it
started.
depends on the deal and and where
Right.
I am financially at that point. Because the thing about real estate investors is sometimes we're loaded with cash and sometimes we're broke, right?
Right. Yeah.
Because you just put all your money into the last deal and you're like, oh crap, I don't have any cash left. But yeah, I mean, fine. I would probably have the conversation with people ahead of time. I wouldn't say like just show up and be like, hey, Jeff, I got this deal. I've got it under contract because once you put stuff under contract, you might have hard earnest money down and stuff. So you want to have some conversations with people in advance. I've coached some people through this process, and one of the more successful ones. I just said to him, like, just talk to everyone you know and tell them you're interested in learning about apartments and find as many people as you can buying apartment buildings. And then
Right.
ask them what they're looking for. And then that way,
Right.
when you see something, you can go to them and be like, hey, I have this potential deal. Here's the general idea. Do you think we can work out a deal on it? Even
Right.
if you don't have it under contract already, if you can usually work that stuff out.
Right.
Because the thing is, it's not like a wholesale deal where you can just easily transfer the contract, right? Like it's not impossible, but it's hard to wholesale apartments because there's so much due diligence involved.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's not like just buying a single family house where you can be like, oh, I know what the comps are. Like I need
Right.
to know what
True.
my expenses are going to be. I need to know what my income's going to be. And if you're doing it enough, you get a pretty good feel for it. You can have these rule of thumbs. I think it's worth X dollars per unit or whatever when it's renovated. But at the end of the day, it's so much has to do with NOI that you really have to know those numbers.
Yeah. And you mentioned that you've coached other investors. Like, what's the one thing that you notice that the biggest difference between the students that you work with or investors that you work with, the ones that are successful and go on to, get deals versus the
Mm.
ones that actually, don't ever, get a deal or, they don't get to their
Yeah,
potential?
so I mean, I spend a lot of time on this. So like my main passion is not real estate. Real estate's great because it creates freedom, but my main passion is about living the best version of your life. And I think the rule's the same for everything. There's a quote from Richard Branson that I really like. It's think about it for a second. Basically, what he said was the difference between successful people and people who never succeed is that successful people take action without all of the possible information. So if I want
Mm,
to unpack that, what he's not saying without any information. He's saying without all the possible information. So I think that means you have to do your research, study, get the coaching, go to the meetups, whatever it might be. But then you also have to take the right actions. And you take the right actions by asking what, where, when, why questions, getting the information, but then at some point just jumping off the cliff. Because if you want to be a real estate investor, you have to buy real estate. I think everyone listening or most people listening is interested in real estate. And a lot of people who are interested in real estate go to real estate meetups and they get business cards and they get hats with their company name on it and they get a website and they just keep doing that for 3, 4, 5, 6 years and they just never buy anything. And that's
yeah.
not the right action. The right action is underwrite deals, buy deals, make offers, close on deals. You
Yeah.
can't be a real estate investor if you don't buy real estate.
Yeah, I've been guilty of that, in the beginning. I would focus so much on my logo, my company name,
Yeah.
what colors, what design does it need to look like. And now when I look back, nobody cares about that. No one
No,
absolutely cares
we all
about
do
that.
that, but
Yeah.
at some point you just got to jump off the
Yeah.
cliff. And it's
Well,
scary and it's what separates people who are successful, right? Like if you don't take the right action, you're never going to be successful.
yeah.
You can only make money in real estate by doing real estate deals.
Absolutely. And one thing that I 100% agree with you that you said, in order to be a real estate investor, you have to have done some real estate deals. There are like way too many people. I don't go to RIAs often now, but when I used to back in the day, you would have these 80-90% of the people show up and introduce themselves as real estate investors and never done a deal.
Oh
They've
yeah.
just been, which
And the
it's
same
like,
people 2, 3 years later are introducing
yeah,
themselves as real
yeah.
estate investors.
Exactly. And then they would always have, oh, I'm still looking at it. I'm just like you said, always trying to get that one additional piece of information that is the missing piece of information for
Yeah.
them. And then you look at some other people that just come in and in the same market with the same resources available and sometimes less resources available to them versus these other investors, so-called investors, and they would just like absolutely come in and
Yeah,
crush.
and I mean, I see people that make me look slow, right? Like I bought a
Yeah.
lot of deals. I mean, we flipped hundreds of houses, and I bought a ton of property in the first few years that I was investing. But I see people come in and they're in apartments 6 months after being in real estate,
Yeah.
and I'm like, it took me 7 years. What was I
Yeah.
thinking? But the reality is, it's if one person can do it, any person can do it, right? Like we
Yep.
just got to go do it. And if we repeat the same actions, we show up as the person who's doing those things, then we're going to be that person. And so I spend most of my time when I do coaching and now I have a little mastermind I do when we do those things, it's mostly around mindset. It's more about, how do you get your mind right? How do you know what
Yeah.
things to do? And then how do you get the accountability you need to go do those things?
Yeah. I think that's the most important thing at the end of the day. If you have the right mindset, then you can go out and achieve anything that you want.
Exactly.
But if not, then you're always going to be on the sideline, always going to be, doing analysis paralysis. At some point, you just got to go take action, right? You don't want to live a life of regret. Like I really love that you said that, you want to live a full life. Your purpose is to
Mhm.
live a full life, have a purpose or meaning behind it. Like you don't want to have like for me, how I decided to jump into real estate full time was I looked at my life, like 20, 10, 15, 20 years down the road, and I didn't want to have the regret of not taking action.
Yeah.
I was okay, especially at the age that I was starting, no kids, no real obligation. It's like, what's the worst that's going to happen? I lose everything I have, which is not a lot, but I can always go get a job. I can always get a fresh start in life. But my God, I never want to, live a life of looking back and 15, 20 years down the road, I'm like, oh shoot, I wish I'd done that, when I had the opportunity. So that's such an important thing. And then the only way to know if you can do it and not do it or not is by taking action. That's the only
Yeah.
way. That's the only way to find out. Yeah.
Well, and you learn so much. Like even if you make a bad deal,
Oh yeah.
the what you learn from that deal is so valuable. And yeah, just I mean that's exactly it. I mean,
Yeah.
if I could summarize everything in life, if you want to be successful, just take action.
Take
You got to
action.
be doing
Yeah.
something. Like another thing I think about a lot is I have this metaphor that I wrote in my book where I talked about a rocket ship taking off. And like 90% of the effort is getting into orbit. Like if you're aiming for the International Space Station and you miss by half of the world away, right? You're
Yeah.
12,000 miles away. If you burned up 90% of your fuel getting there, it doesn't matter because once you're in orbit, it's just these little tiny adjustments
Right.
to get there. So with real estate investing, it's the same thing. The big effort is getting started. If you make a little mistake here or there, it's
Yeah.
probably not going to kill you. Like
Yeah.
get started, get that momentum, and then you can make the adjustments to, tweak your returns and things like that.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, like people, I've seen far too many people, they would think, oh, they want to make 30, 40,000 on their first flip. I'm like, man, even if you make five, even if you break even, that's
Hmm.
amazing. Like, imagine the experience that you would have going and taking action and then knowing exactly what you need to fix on the next one. You would be so far ahead of like 80, 90% of the people out there. Like,
Yeah,
I
I
mean,
mean that's the thing. There are like one point some I think 1.6 million real estate investors in the US. The average number of units that those 1.6 million real estate investors have is like 1.1, right? Like it's
wow,
like
1.1.
1 point, yeah, it's something really low
That's
like that. Don't quote me on
crazy.
the exact amount, but
Yeah,
it's
yeah, but
so
yeah,
low.
no, but I get
So
the
so
idea.
someone who bought a duplex is already in like the top, third of real
Yeah.
estate investors in the country
Uh-huh.
because so many people have like one unit. And the reason they have one unit, the majority of those, I think I read somewhere like 75% of real estate investors are really just accidental landlords, right? They had a house they couldn't sell or they
Yeah.
inherited a house. Like they didn't actually take action. So the number of people that actually do this is so small relative
Yeah.
to the total population. And that makes it really easy. Like real estate is an inefficient market where you can gain advantages over the rest of the market. You can know things about a neighborhood that the institutional investors don't know just by buying next. If you buy the house next door to you, like literally, that's the only thing you did your whole life is you just bought your neighbor's house and rented it out. And 30 years later, it was paid off. Now you have your house paid off and that one paid off. Your retirement's set.
Yeah.
It's almost that easy. Like
Right.
you just have to do it and you just have to build a strategy around recognizing that long-term real estate investments are probably going to work out.
Yeah.
And then it's just like, how do I make sure that I have adequate cash flow, capital reserves, and long-term financing in place to make it work?
Yeah. What's the best mindset hack or mindset tip you give your coaching students to help them get over that hump?
Yeah, so I spend a lot of time thinking about self-identifying statements and recognizing that how we show up is who we are. So like it's really easy to have these ideas like, well, I can't do that, or I don't have enough money to do that, or you have all these limiting statements that you think in your head. But what you have to do is you have to figure out who you are and then show up fully as that person. It's about being super authentic in yourself. And I know that sounds kind of, woo woo or something, but like it's the reality. Like
But
it's like
it's
when
a
people,
reality. Yeah.
yeah,
That's
people talk
100%
about
the
the law
reality.
of attraction all the time, right? And I used to be very resistant to that because I'm like, that doesn't make any sense. But the reality is, I think we open ourselves up to ideas. So if I were to really super summarize it, I have this formula I call the extraordinary life formula. And it basically is this: inspired thought plus the right action equals an extraordinary life. And inspired thought is just opening yourself up to opportunity. So doing new things, asking yourself questions like, when's the last time I did something for the first time? Think about that. When's the
Right.
last time you did something for the first time? If you ask yourself that once a week, it's going to change your life. You're going to
I
see
love that.
opportunity that you never saw before.
I
And
love that question,
yeah,
Jeff. That's
and
so
the first time it
amazing.
could be something stupid. It could be like
Yeah.
going to a different Starbucks, right? It doesn't
Yeah.
actually matter. Like just
Yeah.
change the route you drive to work. You might see a new property or a new neighborhood you didn't know was there before. I used to drive Uber to learn where the apartment complexes were. Like I literally like
Wow.
driving around in my Mercedes, driving in premium fuel, losing money per mile that I drove
Yeah.
with Uber. And people would get in my car and be like, "This is the nicest Uber I've ever been in." I'm like, "Yeah, I'm just driving around looking at apartment buildings." And they're
Wow.
like, "What?" And I'm like, "Ah, tell me about your apartments. I'm like interested in like, what are you paying rent?" And like not
That
everyone
is
would answer,
such a
but like
cool thing.
that was my goal. Like I want to learn the
Yeah.
neighborhoods and I want to hear from the
Yeah.
people.
That's
Um,
amazing.
yeah,
That's it.
and I
That's
mean,
that's that's what it's all about. Just taking action. Like
yeah,
everything that you need in this world is available to you. You just have
yes,
to be willing to get it. I heard this quote, the pain of not taking an action has to be bigger than like your pain of just kind of being
yeah,
where you're at. I think people get comfortable with the pain that they have in their lives, and
yes.
then it just they don't take action after that. So
It's
yeah,
hard
I
to get out of
wonder.
your comfort zone,
Yeah,
but
exactly.
if you surround yourself by people that are doing big things, it becomes easier to do big things. It's like that Jim Rohn quote, "You're the average of the five people you
Five
spend your
people.
most time with."
That is so true.
But I mean,
Yeah.
just seeing other people do big things, that's another way to wake yourself up and to see those opportunities, right? So that's where
Yeah.
you get those inspired thoughts. And then
Yeah.
the second part of the formula is just deciding what
Taking
action to
a
take. Don't build a website, go buy real estate,
Yeah.
And the way you sort that out is you ask good questions and you get good mentorship. You can
Yeah.
figure out what action you need to take and then go take that
Absolutely.
action.
Absolutely. Jeff, this has been absolutely incredible. Like I love talking about the mindset stuff. I've actually recently just start rereading Think and Grow Rich because
Love it.
it's something you need to just keep reminding yourself, like the law of attraction, the affirmation, and then having the right mindset. That is the biggest advantage that you have. Like if you can control the operating system that you have in your body, your mind, just there's
Yeah.
nothing that you cannot do. Yeah, and like surrounding yourselves around with people that are doing big things. Like one thing, when I look back, one of my biggest regrets that I have is I wish I had joined a mastermind, sooner. I wish I had started working with the coach, because then they would have pulled me up rather than me trying to break through this ceiling, with a limited mindset. If I was working in a mastermind, or working with a coach and seeing these people doing these amazing things, then you start believing like, hey, if they can do it, why can't I do it? And
Yeah.
that's just such a great mindset to have.
Yeah, and he doesn't even if you don't have the resources necessarily to join an
Yeah.
expensive mastermind or work with a coach that might cost a few $1,000s a month or something, right? Like even if you don't have those resources, you could just read autobiographies. Like,
Yeah.
well, I spent a lot of time reading. Like, I gave that Richard Branson quote earlier, but look, think what Richard Branson is. He was a high school dropout, and now
Yeah.
he's a billionaire, and he builds
Right.
spaceships and like
Yeah.
owns an island in the Caribbean, right? And all he did was get his mindset right. He just kept
Yeah.
doing stuff. And I mean, he wrote this entire book, Screw It, Let's Do It, where the whole premise of the book is like I'd have an idea and like I would ask some good questions and then after that I would just be like, "Okay, let's do it." Right?
Yeah.
Like let's just go do it and surround yourself
Yeah.
by good people and go figure out how to do it. And everyone can do it. If Richard Branson can do it, then I can do it. You can
Absolutely.
do it.
Absolutely. Jeff, thank you so much. This has been absolutely incredible. I got a couple of last questions to ask you. You travel a lot, right?
I do.
What do you do? What do you do for fun? What's absolutely the most funnest place you've ever been to? Most memorable place?
Uh, Probably Antarctica. It was really, really
Oh,
great.
wow.
Yeah, yeah.
Really? How did you
Antarctica's,
go from like Chile?
yeah. I went
What?
from Argentina, from
Argentina.
Ushuaia. Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
And I did that in 2021, so it was like in the middle of the pandemic almost. So there was
Wow.
nobody down there. It was
Well, you don't have
crazy.
to worry about the social distancing.
Yeah, well, that's right. There's like nobody in Antarctica, so it's actually really easy. So it's January of 21. So I mean, it really was pretty early in the. It might have been January 22. I don't know. It doesn't matter. It was a couple years ago, and it was really, really great. But my personal like favorite travel stuff involves going to places where the culture is significantly different and meeting the locals. So like
Right.
I've made friends in Cairo, and people
Wow.
that run safari lodges in Tanzania. Like those people I really like meeting those and seeing what they're doing and becoming friends and going back to the same place over and over. Like I've been to Egypt 5 times, Tanzania 3 times.
Wow.
And that kind of stuff is really that's really where it's at for me. I mean, I
Yeah.
like those big experiences like Antarctica or
Yeah.
when I climbed Mount Kilimanjaro, that was awesome. But that's like a one-off. I'm not doing those
Yeah.
things very often.
Right. Right. Have you been to all seven continents?
I have, yeah.
You
Antarctica
have?
was my
Nice.
seventh. That was a big goal of mine. So I have this goal. I'm in a big fan of writing your goals down, but also simplifying them to things that you can remember, kind of like a
Yeah.
mental hashtag.
Yeah.
I have a goal. It's called 50, 50, 57. And it was 50 countries, 50 states, 7 continents before I turned 50. And I'm 46. I got 41 countries, 7 continents, and all 50 states. So I've got 9 more countries to go in the next 4
That's
years.
amazing. I love that. That's such an inspiring story. Yeah. I mean, I've been to five continents. Australia and Antarctica are the two that are left. So looking
Australia
forward to
is
that.
great. You should go. I
Yeah.
was there
Yeah.
last year. It was the second time I went there. I love
Yeah.
Australia.
We were
Yeah.
planning for this year, December, but then we're actually going to Costa Rica. So maybe next year,
Costa
Australia.
Rica is
Yeah.
also really nice, so I
Yeah.
can't fault you there. Australia is really on sale right now, relative to the US dollar, so that's something to
Okay.
consider when you're budgeting. The when I went to Australia in 2013, the Australian dollar was $1.30 US for $1 Australian dollar, and now it's like
Yeah.
70 cents for one
Yeah.
Australian dollar. So there's like
Yeah.
50% cheaper now than it was then.
Absolutely. Yeah, I used to work with a lot of Australian investors back in 2011 through 14, 15, when the Australian dollar was very strong against the US dollar because they were
Yeah.
buying so much real estate, but then it kind of flipped now. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Jeff, what's
Oh,
the most, go ahead.
no, I was just going to say, yeah, I mean, that's our experience too. We had a lot of
Yeah.
Australian investors back then, and now it doesn't
Yeah.
work for them.
Yeah. What's the most influential book you've read in your life? It could be a business book, personal book, or one of each.
That's hard because there's so many great books. So the book that probably had the biggest impact on my life, period, is Michael Crichton's autobiography. So Michael Crichton is the science fiction writer who wrote Jurassic Park
Okay.
and stuff like that. He's a fascinating guy. I actually just finished a book of his last night. He died in 2008. But his widow teamed up with James Patterson, and they released a book a few months ago. And I just finished reading that, and it was like a throwback to my youth when I used to
Yeah.
read everything Crichton wrote. So that was really fun. But his autobiography, he talks about a lot of weird new age stuff that I'm not super into, like talking to cactuses at retreats in the middle of the desert and stuff. But he also talks about travel. He talks about climbing Mount Kilimanjaro and learning to scuba dive. And I've done a lot of that stuff, and it inspired the way that I live my life. And what I realized is this is a guy who is a Harvard trained medical doctor who never practiced medicine. He went out and followed his passions every which way he could, right? He wrote books and movies and things like that, but he also just, traveled and experienced the world. And that set me on a train of reading about other authors and their autobiographies. So, well, is that the best book ever? No, but for me, it had the most influence. And I think
Yeah.
that's what the question was. So,
Yeah. No, no, absolutely. Great answer. All right, final question. If you could spend a day with anyone, dead or alive, who would you want to spend the day with and why?
that is very interesting. It'd be easier to name 10 people than one, right? It's trying to narrow it down.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
I've I'm fascinated by people who do really big things. And so I would definitely be interested in talking to somebody like Elon Musk if there were someone
Yeah.
alive, but I think I would pick Da Vinci if I had to pick anyone of all time. I'd pick Leonardo da Vinci because he just looked at the world in such a different way.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's a close call.
Yeah.
Musk, Franklin,
No.
Da Vinci. I mean, hell, even someone like Trump, like as complicated and weird as that guy can be, like the guy just doesn't seem to quit. And I
Yeah.
love people that just
I
don't
love
quit.
that.
Like
Absolutely.
I mean,
You have to admire that,
yeah.
regardless
I
of
mean,
which
even if you
side of the
completely
politics.
disagree with his
Yeah. You
personality and his
have to admire
politics,
that.
like, and I mean, there's other people, across the entire political spectrum like that. But it's just when someone is willing to just go for it,
Yeah.
like that's really interesting to me. Like when you look at the
Absolutely.
world in a way where you say, I create my own reality, and that's Elon Musk, right? Elon Musk's
Yeah.
probably the best living example of that. So here's a guy
Absolutely.
who grew up lower middle class in southern Africa and now is the richest man in the world and revolutionized not one but like 3 or 4 industries already, and
Absolutely.
he just keeps going.
Keeps going. Yeah. No, absolutely. No, all great answers. Right, Jeff, this has been incredible. If someone listening to this wants to connect with you, learn more about your journey or wants to find out more about the coaching program, what's the best way for them to do that?
I mean, I'm Jeffrey Holst everywhere, right? So all of the social media is Jeffrey Holst on Facebook, Instagram, X, whatever, doesn't matter. But my website, jeffreyholst.com, is probably the easiest way.
Perfect. All right. We'll put links to all of that in the show notes. Jeff, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. This was absolutely incredible, super inspiring, and congratulations on all the success you've had.
Yeah, thanks for having me.